I was grabbing a drink with an old colleague last Tuesday, a guy who, by all traditional metrics, is winning. He's fit, earns well, and has that polished, high-status look that should make the modern dating market a breeze. Halfway through our conversation, he pulled out his phone, his eyes gleaming with a sort of frantic, jittery pride. "Look at this," he whispered, scrolling through a literal catalog of beautiful women who had swiped right on him just that morning. He looked like a man who had cracked the code, showing off his digital harem as if it were a physical trophy room. He kept using the word abundance, convinced he was standing on the precipice of an endless romantic summer. But then a notification bubble popped up, a simple "hey" from a high-value match, and the strangest thing happened. His hand actually started to shake. He didn't reply. He didn't even look at the message. Instead, he locked the screen with a sudden, violent thumb press, and his face collapsed into this hollow gray mask of total exhaustion. "I'm exhausted," he admitted, his voice dropping an octave. He confessed he hadn't actually been on a real-world date in 6 months. He was matches rich, but intimacy bankrupt. He was spending 4 hours a day ego-scrolling, chasing a 3-second hit of validation dopamine that evaporated the moment he looked up from the glass screen. That instantaneous shift from the high of the digital match to the crushing weight of his actual physical isolation was jarring. It was the look of a man who realized he wasn't the hunter in this ecosystem, but the lab rat. It made me realize that what we're seeing in 2026 isn't a glitch in the dating market. It's a total biological hijacking. We are witnessing a record-breaking era of connection that is simultaneously producing a psychological ice age for men. The contradictory logic of feeling like a king on an app while living like a hermit in reality suggests that the abundance we're being promised is nothing more than a digitally curated phantom designed to keep the psyche in a state of perpetual profitable hunger.
Wow. That is a haunting image, isn't it?
It was jarring.
The way you describe his face just collapsing.
Yeah.
It's a perfect encapsulation of the whole paradox we're living through. You know, we have these little devices in our pockets that promise us everything.
Infinite everything.
Infinite connection, infinite romance, infinite validation. And yet, when you actually peel back the screen, the reality is this profound, crushing isolation. It feels like a systemic crash.
Dude, it looked biological. It looked like his battery had just drained to 0 in a millisecond.
Right.
And that's really why we're doing this deep dive today. We aren't here to just, share bad date stories or complain that dating is hard.
Everybody knows it's hard.
We want to understand the mechanism behind what I called that psychological ice age. We want to understand why a man who looks like a winner on paper feels like a lab rat in practice.
And to do that, you really have to look at the machinery. You have to strip away the emotional layer for a second and look at the economics, the evolutionary biology, and the actual algorithmic design that's driving all of this. Right. Because it's not an accident.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack three massive concepts that really define the 2026 dating landscape.
Okay.
We're going to explore digital hypergamy, which, sounds technical, but it's actually the engine of the whole problem. We're also going to look at something called the sexual Girani coefficient.
A term from economics.
A term borrowed from economics that explains frankly, the terrifying inequality of the modern dating market. And then we're going to talk about evolutionary mismatch, which essentially explains why your brain feels like it's breaking.
And we should probably be clear here. When we talk about this, we are looking at the data. This isn't about, taking sides in some kind of culture war.
No, not.
It's about reporting on a massive shift in human behavior and the technological structures that are, frankly, monetizing our own biology.
Exactly. So let's start with the market itself, because I think a lot of people feel like the game is rigged, but they don't realize just how mathematically impossible the odds have become for the average person. I was scrolling through a series of video essays recently, and I came across the story of a guy named Elias, a 28-year-old junior architect living in Zurich.
Okay.
I heard that Elias represents what researchers are now calling the statistical ghost of the 2026 dating market.
Statistical ghost?
Yeah, and he's a decent guy. He's fit, educated, employed, but in the digital ecosystem, he has effectively been rendered invisible.
Yeah.
I watched him describe his daily routine. 3 hours of swiping across 4 different platforms.
3 hours a day?
3 hours a day, resulting in 0 meaningful interactions. 0. He spoke about this sexual Gini coefficient, not as some dry economic term, but as a wall he hits every single morning. In 2026, the algorithmic hypergamy has become so refined that the top tier of the market just captures nearly all the attention, leaving men like Elias in a state of what they call sexual recession. I mean, try to imagine the psychological toll of being told by a machine every single day that your mate value just doesn't meet the hyperinflated threshold of the digital mirror. My heart goes out to guys like Elias. It's easy to dismiss this as, bitterness, but when you look at the data, it's actually a systemic market failure.
It really is.
As a creator, I see this with Elias as a warning. When we allow algorithms to gatekeep human connection, we create a world where 80% of men are living in a psychological drought while the digital interface continues to sell them this mirage of plenty.
That term, statistical ghost, is just incredibly apt for someone like Elias. Because in the physical world, he's a catch. He's an architect, he's in shape, he lives in a major city. If you put him in a bar in 1995, he would have done fine.
He would have done great.
But in the digital ecosystem of 2026, he might as well not exist. He's below the fold. He's invisible.
And he mentioned that term, the Gini coefficient. I remember this vaguely from a college economics class, I think, usually when talking about wealth inequality in developing nations. But how on earth are we applying this to dating apps?
It's the exact same mathematical principle. In economics, the Gini coefficient is a measure of statistical dispersion. It's meant to represent income inequality or wealth inequality within a nation or a social group.
Okay.
It's a scale from 0 to 1. A Gini coefficient of 0 expresses perfect equality.
Okay.
So everyone has the exact same income.
A utopia.
Yeah. And a Gini coefficient of 1 expresses maximal inequality. One person has all the income and everyone else has nothing. 0.
Okay, so 0 is a utopia of equality, and 1 is a total tyranny. Just to give us some context, where do real-world countries actually sit on this scale?
Well, the United States, which is generally considered to have pretty high income inequality for a developed nation, sits at around 0.41.
0.41, okay.
And that implies a significant gap between the rich and the poor. Scandinavian countries are much lower, usually in the 0.2s.
Okay, so 0.41 is considered high. Now, what happens when researchers apply the same metric to the Tinder economy? If we treat likes and matches as the currency, what is the Gini coefficient of the dating market?
This is where the data gets really shocking. The dating app economy has a Gini coefficient of approximately 0.58.
0.58. That is significantly higher than the wealth inequality in the U.S. Yeah.
To find a real-world national economy with a Gini coefficient of 0.58, you have to look at kleptocracies or nations that are undergoing severe civil collapse or, apartheid-like stratification. No. We are talking about levels of inequality that are comparable to places like Angola, Botswana, or even South Africa at the height of their internal disparities.
Wow. So we are effectively saying that the digital dating landscape has the same wealth distribution as a failed state.
The wealth, which in this case is attention, validation, and ultimately reproductive opportunity, is aggressively concentrated at the very, very top.
What does that mean in practice?
It means the bottom 80% of men are effectively competing for the bottom 22% of women.
80% for 22%.
Meanwhile, the top 78% of women are all competing for that same top 20% of men.
That 80-20 split is just brutal. It explains why a guy like Elias, who is by all accounts above average in the real world, feels like he's starving.
Of course.
He is in the bottom 80% of the algorithm, which means he is just fighting over scraps.
He's in a sexual recession. And it's not because there aren't women out there. It's because the market mechanism, the app itself, has created a massive liquidity crisis for the majority of men.
And this brings us to the mechanism that's driving it all. Algorithmic hypergamy. Now, I hear the word hypergamy thrown around a lot in online forums, usually with a lot of anger attached to it. But let's just strip away the emotion for a second. What does it actually mean in this context?
Hypergamy, in a strict biological and anthropological sense, is simply the instinct to mate up or mate across social hierarchies.
Okay.
Historically, females in many species, humans included, have been selective. They look for partners who can provide security, better genes, status, or resources. It's a natural evolutionary survival strategy. It's basically risk management.
Right. Nature is pragmatic. It's not romantic.
Yeah.
How does technology change that fundamental instinct?
Technology supercharges it. It puts it on steroids. We call it the digital mirror effect.
The digital mirror effect.
Yeah. Think about what happens when an average woman joins a dating app in 2026. She uploads a photo. Within hours, maybe even minutes, she might have hundreds of likes.
Right.
Now, a lot of those likes are low effort. Men just swiping right on every single profile. But her brain doesn't register them as spam. Her primitive brain registers every single one as a valid suitor.
She sees 500 likes and thinks, wow, I am highly desired.
Exactly. It creates what we call the virtual harem effect. It simulates a state of infinite abundance that never existed before in human history.
Yeah.
If you have 500 people clamoring for your attention, your perception of your own mate value just skyrockets. You start thinking, why should I go on a date with Elias, the junior architect, when I literally just matched with a CEO, a pilot, and a fitness model yesterday?
Even if those high-value guys have absolutely no intention of dating her seriously.
The signal creates the expectation. It raises the threshold permanently. The price of a date creates inflation in the market. The abundance is a mirage, but the effect on the market is very, very real. It permanently lifts the bar out of reach for the average man.
So the top tier of men, let's call the top 10%, they're living in a world of what you called liquidity surplus. They are literally drowning in options.
And because they have so many options, they have no incentive to commit. They can treat people disposably. Meanwhile, the bottom 80% are in a drought, a desert.
And this leads to that behavioral divide we see in the data. I've read stats saying that men send something like 80% of the first messages on these platforms. It just feels like a desperate volume game.
Men realize, either consciously or subconsciously, that they are in a recession. So they adopt what's called a shotgun approach. They swipe right on nearly everyone. They copy and paste messages. They're just trying to maximize their chances of getting one single hit.
Which, of course, just creates more noise in the system.
Exactly. It floods the ecosystem with low-quality interactions. Women, on the other hand, are absolutely overwhelmed by this noise. They are drowning in it. So they adopt a sniper approach.
Right. They filter aggressively.
They swipe left on almost everyone just to filter out the chaos.
Yeah.
This creates a feedback loop from hell.
A feedback loop from hell.
The men feel invisible, which leads to depression and this sense of market failure. And the women feel overwhelmed and harassed, which leads to burnout and ghosting.
It really is a market failure. In economics, you'd say the market isn't clearing. You have willing buyers and willing sellers, but the mechanism connecting them is fundamentally broken.
And here's the darkest part of the analysis. The algorithm profits from this failure.
Because if the market actually cleared, if Elias found a wife tomorrow,
He would delete the app.
he'd delete the app.
And the app loses a customer. That's called churn in the industry. The dysfunction is the business model. The app is incentivized to keep you in that state of perpetual, profitable hunger.
So they're selling the promise of connection, but they are monetizing the state of isolation. That is a terrifying thought to hold on to. The tool we're all using to find love is actually designed to keep us looking for it forever. But I want to pivot here because we've looked at the economics, the Gini coefficient, the raw numbers, but we are biological creatures. We aren't just data points on a graph. I want to talk about what this is actually doing to the human brain.
The neurochemical level.
Exactly. I read a deeply unsettling thread on a forum last week about a man named Marcus, whose experience perfectly illustrates this evolutionary mismatch we're seeing in recent University of Zurich studies.
Okay.
Marcus described his brain as being permanently on fire. Our ancestral instincts, they're designed for these small-scale social groups where maybe a dozen potential mates represent a lifetime of opportunity. Yet Marcus was processing thousands of profiles a night. I heard him describe the validation dopamine loop as a digital drug. You get that tiny hit of dopamine from a rare match, followed by the crushing spike in cortisol, and the conversation just goes cold. He ended up in a clinical depression, a victim of what scientists are calling estrus disruption via the screen. His brain thought he was in a global village of endless possibilities, but his physical reality was a lonely apartment and a completely hijacked reward system.
It's a tragic irony.
The more connected he became via the algorithm, the more his biological hardware malfunctioned. Watching Marcus's journey, I realized that we are essentially running 2026 software on Pleistocene hardware, and the hardware is starting to break. And while some might view this as a personal failure of willpower, I see it as a predatory design flaw in modern tech that ignores our biological limits for the sake of engagement metrics.
Pleistocene hardware running 2026 software. That is the fundamental thesis of evolutionary mismatch.
Yeah.
Marcus isn't weak. He is being subjected to a stimulus that his biology has absolutely no defense against.
So let's unpack this for the listener. Why can't our brains handle Tinder? I mean, we handle other complex modern things. We drive cars at 70 miles per hour. We code in Python. Why is mating the thing that breaks us?
Because mating is the most primal, deep-seated biological imperative we have. It is, for all intents and purposes, the operating system of the species.
Okay.
For 99.9% of human history, we live in small tribes, maybe 50 to 150 people. This is known as Dunbar's number. In that environment, meeting a potential mate, someone of the right age, health, and status, was a rare, high-stakes event.
Right. If you saw a viable mate in your tribe, your brain had to pay attention. It was a critical, all-hands-on-deck moment.
Exactly. Your brain would release this massive cocktail of neurochemicals to basically say, focus, reproductive opportunity ahead. Now, fast forward to 2026. You open an app, you see 50, 100, maybe 1,000 faces in a single hour. Ethologists call these supernormal stimuli.
Supernormal stimuli. That's like junk food, right? The comparison people always make.
It's precisely like junk food. Sugar exists in nature, in fruit. But a candy bar is a supernormal stimulus. It's a concentration of sugar that doesn't exist in the natural world, and it hacks your taste buds. Tinder is a supernormal stimulus for your mating drive. Your brain, specifically the amygdala and the hypothalamus, sees a beautiful face on a screen, and it interprets that as, here's a mate who is physically close and available.
But the logical part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, knows it's just pixels on a screen.
The logical part does, but the deep subconscious reptilian part of the brain does not. The brain registers digital proximity as social availability. So when Marcus is swiping, his brain literally thinks he is standing in the middle of the most fertile, abundant harem in all of human history. It triggers an arousal response. It triggers an expectation of success.
And that's the estrus disruptor concept that Marcus mentioned.
Yes. The constant visual stream of potential mates hacks the mating drive. It decouples the drive from reality. You're constantly overstimulated, but chronically undersatiated. You're constantly revving the engine, but never putting the car in gear.
And this is what leads to ego scrolling. It stops being about actually dating, and it just starts being about getting the hit.
It becomes pure addiction. And we have to look at the neurochemistry to understand why. When Marcus is swiping, he is engaging in what behaviorists call intermittent reinforcement. This is the exact same psychological mechanic used in casino slot machines.
The casino analogy.
Exactly. If you pulled a lever on a slot machine and got a pellet every single time, you'd get bored. If you never got a pellet, you'd quit. But if you get a pellet sometimes, randomly, maybe on the 5th pull, maybe on the 50th.
You pull it forever.
That creates the strongest addiction loop known to science. You become the lab rat. The swipe is the lever. The match is the pellet.
But for the guys we're talking about, that bottom 80%, the pellet is very, very rare.
And that is where the real psychological damage occurs. The act of swiping itself releases dopamine. That's the molecule of anticipation of maybe this time. But when the match doesn't come, or when the match turns out to be a bot, or when you get ghosted after 2 messages, you get a massive spike in cortisol. That is the stress hormone.
So you are just oscillating between dopamine and cortisol, these huge highs and crushing lows over and over and over again.
Constantly. This creates a state of chronic ambient stress. The CDC and other researchers have noted that depression and anxiety are now affecting something like 34.2% of the population. There is a growing body of research that is drawing a direct line between this algorithmic cycle and that statistic.
Wow.
It is the matches-rich intimacy bankrupt phenomenon in action. You are chemically, physically exhausted.
You know, it reminds me of Shoshana Zuboff's work on surveillance capitalism. It feels like we are being mined. Our emotions are being mined.
That is a critical connection to make. Zuboff talks about instrumentarian power. The goal of these platforms isn't to serve you. You are not the customer. You are the raw material.
The raw material for what, though?
For behavioral data extraction. They want to predict and modify your behavior. If they can keep you in that state of perpetual, profitable hunger, as you so perfectly put it in the intro, they win. They're selling your attention, your frustration, your ego scrolling. They sell it to advertisers. They are extracting value from your loneliness.
That is just so dark. The app essentially sells the promise of connection, but its entire business model relies on keeping you disconnected.
It's a paradox. To be profitable, they need you to stay on the app. If you find a partner, you leave. So the algorithm is incentivized to give you just enough dopamine to keep you hoping, but never enough success to let you actually leave the system.
So we're all just trapped in a casino where the house desperately wants us to keep playing the slots forever, but never, ever hit the jackpot.
And this leads to a fundamental change in how we as humans experience rejection. It used to be that rejection was a face-to-face event. It hurt, obviously. but it was occasional.
Exactly. You'd ask someone out at a bar, they'd say no, you'd feel bad for a night, and then life would go on. It was a specific, contained event in time.
Now, rejection is constant, it's quantifiable, and it's ambient. We've entered what some researchers call a micro-rejection ecosystem.
Micro-rejection.
It's the ghosting, the breadcrumbing. These are low-effort strategies facilitated by the phone. Because of the anonymity and the portability of the device, you don't have to see the pain you cause.
It's asymmetrical warfare, really. For the person doing the rejecting, swiping left or just ignoring a text, it takes zero energy. But for the rejectee,
it's a confirmation of low social worth. And because it happens dozens, maybe hundreds of times a week, it accumulates. It creates a sense of learned helplessness. You start to internalize the idea that you are fundamentally broken.
And I've heard about these hidden scores, these ELO scores. It's not just that other people are rejecting you. The system itself is pre-rejecting you.
This is algorithmic gatekeeping, and it's one of the most insidious parts of the whole system. Most dating apps use some version of an ELO score, which is a ranking system originally designed for chess players. It ranks your desirability.
How does it work for a person, though? How does it rank you?
If high-status people swipe right on you, your score goes up. If low-status people swipe left on you, your score goes down. The algorithm decides who sees whom based entirely on these scores.
So if I'm in that bottom 80% that Elias was talking about,
you are likely hidden from the top users. The app literally hides you to prevent the high-value users from churning. They don't want the popular users to get bored seeing what the algorithm deems unpopular profiles. So you are effectively shouting into the void. You are shadow banned by your own attractiveness score.
That explains why guys try to buy their way out. The gold subscriptions, the platinum boosts, it's a pay-for-advantage model.
But so often, it doesn't work. You can pay to be seen, but you cannot pay to be liked.
Yeah.
If the structural Gini coefficient is 0.58, paying $20 a month isn't going to overcome a massive market failure. It just makes you a paying customer in a rigged casino.
This connects back to something deep in Zuboff's work, that idea of home versus exile.
This is a profound philosophical point. We all have this deep innate need for home, a place where we are known, where we feel safe, where we belong.
Right.
The digital world was sold to us as a new home, a global village for connection. Instead, it has become a place of exile.
Yeah.
We're just wandering through these digital corridors, constantly being evaluated, tracked, and rejected. We feel homeless in the very place that promised us connection.
There's that Portuguese word Zuboff mentions, saudade.
Saudade, a deep, melancholic longing for something that is absent. In this context, it's a longing for a form of human connection that may no longer exist in the digital age. We are homesick for a way of meeting people that is dying out.
Wow. Hard. We're homesick for a time when a smile actually meant a smile and not a swipe.
Mm-hmm.
So we've diagnosed the problem. The market is rigged by the Gini coefficient, our brains are being hacked by evolutionary mismatch, and we're living in a state of digital exile. But we can't end the deep dive there. We need a way out. We need a strategy.
We do.
Imagine a man named David who finally decided to go dark. I saw his post documenting his transition into what the community calls monk mode. For David, the 2026 digital marketplace had become this hall of distorted signals, a biosemiotic nightmare where digital avatars no longer represented real human value.
Okay.
I heard him talk about how he stopped seeking validation through a glass screen and redirected that energy into pharmacological construction, which is just a fancy way of saying he started building real-world status and physical health. He called it reclaiming psychological sovereignty. Instead of being a slave to the notification pings, he focused on real-world signals. The weight of a barbell, the complexity of a new skill, the genuine, unmediated presence of his friends. I found his story incredibly empowering because it moves past the anger and into a space of strategic retreat. He wasn't giving up on women, he was hedging against a broken system.
Right.
Some might see this monk mode as a form of isolationism or even a radical rejection of modern social norms, but from my perspective, it's a necessary survival tactic. In an atomized society where the digital signal is corrupted, the only way to find your worth is to start looking for it in the palm of your hand and start building it in the real world. It's about opting out of a game you're designed to lose so you can win at the game of being yourself.
David's story is a perfect example of what we call reclaiming sovereignty. It's moving from being a passive victim of the algorithm to being an active agent in your own life.
I love the term strategic naivety that came up in the research. It sounds so counterintuitive. Usually you want to be savvy, not naive.
In this context, strategic naivety means deliberately choosing to ignore the digital signals. It means looking at that abundance on the app, the thousands of profiles, and consciously realizing it's a phantom menu. It's adopting a stoic indifference. You tell yourself, these pixels are not real people until they're physically sitting in front of me.
It's behavioral hedging. You're treating the app like a high-risk, volatile stock. You don't put your life savings, your self-esteem into it.
Exactly. You hedge your bets. You invest your time and energy in something stable. And that brings us to this idea of biosemiotics.
That's a big word. So why does a guy like David need to care about something called biosemiotics?
Biosemiotics is the study of biological signs and codes. In the real world, attraction is based on a massive bandwidth of signals. It's an incredibly high-fidelity transmission.
Okay.
You are picking up on pheromones, the pitch of someone's voice, the way they move their body, their physical presence, the micro-expressions in their eyes. All of this data is being processed subconsciously.
None of which transmits through a JPEG file.
Zero. Absolutely none of it. The app tries to trade biosemiotic value through static pixels. It compresses a human being, a dynamic three-dimensional biological entity, into a flat two-dimensional image. That leads to the distorted signals that David was talking about. The fundamental flaw of the app is that it strips away 90% of what actually makes us attractive to each other.
So David's pharmacological construction, building muscles, learning skills, making money, that's all about rebuilding his biosemiotic value in the real world.
And think about the physiology behind that. When you lift heavy weights or when you master a difficult skill, you physically change your body chemistry. You lower your cortisol levels. You raise your testosterone. You change your posture. You literally change the way you walk into a room.
And that's real status, not just app status.
Exactly. Hierarchy in the real world is tangible. If you are competent, strong, and socially skilled in a room full of people, that is undeniable. On an app, you are just another card in the deck, subject to a hidden score. Building tangible capital, whether that's your body, your career, or your social circle, is the only way to exit the Skinner box.
So it's a shift from being a digital serf, just waiting for the lord of the algorithm to grant you a crumb of attention, to being a reality sovereign.
And this is the crucial pivot. We have to accept that attraction is not a negotiation. It's not a right. It is an amoral biological response. You cannot argue someone into being attracted to you via text message. You have to trigger that biological response in reality.
So the solution isn't to try and fix the app. We can't fix the Gini coefficient. We can't somehow outsmart the algorithm.
No. The solution is to exit the simulation entirely, to stop playing the lab rat, to realize that the game is designed from the ground up to keep you hungry.
So monk mode isn't about hating women or giving up on love.
It's about hedging. It's about saying, I will not let this machine dictate my self-worth. It's about becoming a person who is valuable in the real world, where the algorithm has no power. It is about building a foundation for your life so strong that the fluctuations of the digital market cannot topple you.
That is incredibly empowering. It really takes the power back from the screen and puts it back in your own hands.
It does. And it requires discipline. It requires the willingness to sit with silence, to not chase that cheap dopamine hit from a notification. But the payoff is your sanity. The payoff is becoming real again.
Together. We started with the illusion of the digital harem, that friend of mine literally shaking with exhaustion. We looked at the brutal economics of the sexual Gini coefficient and the invisible wall facing guys like Elias. We dove deep into the evolutionary mismatch that turned Marcus into a dopamine addict, a lab rat in a digital cage. And finally, we saw the exit strategy, David's monk mode, the reclaiming of sovereignty through real-world action.
And if there is one thing to really take away from all of this, it is the amoral nature of the situation. Nature doesn't care about fairness. It doesn't care if you are happy. It cares about genetic functionality. The current digital market is a maladaptive contract. It is a bad deal for your biology and a bad deal for your psychology.
It's a rigged game. And the only way to win a rigged game is to stop playing by its rules.
Exactly. Focus on the reality you can touch, the value you can build, and the person you can become when you finally put the phone down.
I want to leave you with this final thought to mull over. It's something that really crystallized for me during this deep dive. The algorithm simulates a god, and you have been playing the lab rat. Nature never promised fairness. It simply deducts from your account of well-being each time you chase a phantom.